centres are going to be Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, why don't have it in the centre where there's nothing else? Land is cheap. It's a central location. It's a hub. If you're going to have a wheel with spokes, where are you going to have the axle? You're going to have it in the centre, are you not? Hub and spoke. So you do it in this particular way. And in Australia, that's what we have. We have a central location. It's really in the middle of nowhere. There are no big population centres anywhere near this place. But we plonk the hub right in the centre because it makes sense to actually do it that way. Somebody is thinking ahead and saying, well, okay, we've got cheap, you don't need labour because the labour's all coming in. They're the drivers that actually come in. And you've got a working force that are there, a relatively small working force. It's not a bad idea. It's just thinking ahead, of thinking what you're going to do about your location decisions. Okay, the Azerbaijan one is not such a silly idea, if you think about it, because it's a physical location that may just fit. So don't think of the obvious. Go outside of the box. Think outside of the box in this particular one. There are some cultural factors, especially when considering international locations. Cultural factors must be taken into consideration. Different norms and values shape business values and what management styles can be adopted. Goffey and Jones wrote a book called they called it The Character of an Organization. And the character of an organization actually says that there are two types of organization, essentially. One that is focused on solidarity, which is task-oriented, and one that is sociability, which is on the social side. And both extremes are inefficient. It's got to be somewhere in the middle. Remember my story? That's the problem with you Australians. You think because you have done your best, then that is good enough. That particular statement was made by a Swiss German who was not interested in sociability or the people side of that particular decision. It was simply about, did the task get done? Did the task get done? And in this particular case, no, the task failed, the project failed, so therefore, everything was failed. It didn't matter that the people were actually working as hard as they could, 108 hours a week and whatever. It was simply about the task. Now, if you go too far and you're not being caring about the people, then the people get upset. But on the other hand, if you care too much about the people and you don't take much notice of the task, then you fall behind in production terms. So sociability versus solidarity. Different countries have different ways of looking at how they should run their businesses. When you locate a manufacturing plant, some industries such as cement and steel, where it's cost effective to locate close to natural resources to minimize those transportation costs. The cement works in Al-Ain is next to limestone where they get the raw materials from. Often the location consideration is simply to avoid serious negative effects, such as this rendering plant at the exit of the Gateway Bridge in Brisbane. Very quickly, I'll tell you this story. The Brisbane River separates the north side and the south side of Brisbane. Can I ask anybody anybody has flown into Brisbane? You have? To the Gold Coast. Okay, well, to get to the Gold Coast, you have to go over the Brisbane River. And the Brisbane Airport is situated on the north side, but it's just virtually on the river. Before the Gateway Bridge was built, which was, 20 years ago now, there used to be a plant. This used to be an area of dirty industrial zone. And one of the plants that they had there, I'm sure that you won't remember this, one of the plants there was called a rendering plant. Now, a rendering plant is something where when you've taken the meat out of an animal, all of the things that are left over, you render. You render into different things, glycerine and... Anyway, it's not a very nice, not a very pleasant environment to be in. And the worst thing is that it smells. I mean, it is a really, really bad odor of that type of plant, as you can imagine. So it was there. There was no reason for the plant not to be there because nobody ever went to that particular location unless they were going to the plant or they were in that particular industrial area. But then in the wisdom, the Queensland government decided that they would have a bridge, which is called the Gateway Bridge, that linked the Brisbane Airport, or the north side of Brisbane, to the south side, which you have now. Now you have two bridges there, but they had this bridge that went over. So you came out of the airport, you came out of Brisbane Airport, you got into a cab, and this was before the railway was there. You got into a cab, and within 5 minutes you were on the Gateway Bridge. You came up over the Gateway Bridge, and the first thing, your welcome to Brisbane, was the rendering plant. Welcome to Brisbane. And the first impression that you got of Brisbane was this awful smell. So it was a problem. You know, the plant had been there for a long time. It was located in a very remote location. And now you had 100,000 cars a day, welcome to Brisbane, going into this zone that smelt really, really bad. I mean, we were embarrassed for visitors who came from all over the world. And that's the first impression that you got of Brisbane. Not the golden beaches or the lifestyle. It was the smell once you got over the Gateway Bridge. So eventually, they persuaded this rendering plant to move to a location that was way out in the country. You know, the decision to put it there in the first place was absolutely correct. But as time went on, as things changed, you had a bridge, you had the main gateway into, and that's why it's called the Gateway Bridge. It was the main gateway into Brisbane. It became not a good idea to have that particular plant there. The ironic part about it was I already had a villa on a golf course way, way out in the country. So guess where the rendering plant came? Yeah, as I go past it, oh, I remember that smell. So it sort of followed me, which I didn't have much say in it. So again, these are some of the location factors and some of the problems. So the factors influencing the manufacturing plant location, the labor climate, the education. Another reason why in this country we have a highly educated population. You guys are here on a Friday morning. You're part of this educated population here. The productivity of union muscle, the proximity to markets, the quality of life, the proximity to suppliers and resources, the proximity to parent companies' facilities, utilities, taxes, real estate costs, and all other factors, the expansion capability, the alternative transportations, the regulations, the local infrastructure. And if you think about this country, it has got all of that. It has got that, and I still, to this day, cannot work out why more people are not coming here. So, when you are talking about service locations, however, it is the proximity to customers, it's your transportation costs and the proximity to markets, and the location of your competitors. Who has done the marketing unit on this one? The marketing? You've all done marketing? Okay. You haven't done marketing? Okay. I think I understand what you're saying, but I'm not going to get into it right now. When I was working in Taoyuan, I was staying in a hotel. It's called the Majesty Hotel. When you come out of the Majesty Hotel, there was a right next to the entrance of the Majesty Hotel, the back entrance of the Majesty Hotel, was a shoe shop, sold shoes. And on the other side, there was a shoe shop. And across the road, see if you can guess what it was. Shoe shop. And right next to that, there was and there, shoe shop. It's the shoe shop district. This was a different way than I had known about where to locate your products. It was, I don't know whether this is the Chinese way or it's certainly not a Western way. Usually when you locate something with a Western business model, you say, well, okay, I'm not going to go there because there's already competition in that area. But it was a way in which you could actually get people to get some synergies out of a whole area. Because if you wanted to buy some shoes, you knew exactly what area to go to. So everybody floated to this same area to buy the same thing. So again, this is not a marketing course, but you have to think about terms of should it be a good idea to have your competitors here or not. There are some high-tech examples, especially in Britain. The motor racing industry, the Formula One motor racing industry, globally, even though it's a World Series, is centered around a very small area, around the circuit of Silverstone. You have all sorts of very specialized services, the carbon fiber, all the advanced electronics, all around there. So, yes, all of your competition are around there because it's more convenient to locate your services where there are other experts. You have a pool of knowledge, you have a pool of resources, so it's an interesting scenario. So your location of competitors may, in some cases, mean that you located it away from competitors, but on other ways, you say, well, okay, I'll locate it next to my competitors. So you can take advantages either way. There's methods for making those location decisions. There are heuristics, which is really rule-based. There is simulation, which you can do in trial and error analysis. We could spend a whole day talking about all of these, but the optimization is probably the best answer given the constraints of the situation. You never get the ideal situation. There always has to be balances, checks and balances between the locations that you make. But those are three ways that you can make it. The layout involves the physical arrangement of economics activities centered within that facility. So the arrangement of activities, processes, departments, workstations, storage areas, aisles, and common areas are really a science just to itself. We're talking mainly here about manufacturing, but we should also be concerned about our service locations, about how our offices are actually set up. Because the location of an office, just one of the examples I used, does anybody heard of water cooler technology? Water cooler technology? Yeah? When you have a knowledge-intensive organization, what you want to do is you want to share knowledge between everybody within that organization. It makes your organization much more effective if people talk to one another about what they're doing. It works as an organization, not as a group of individuals. So where you locate your water cooler within an office becomes very critical because people gravitate towards the water cooler. And while they're at the water cooler, they meet other people. And that is a way in which you get to talk. Tacit to tacit knowledge, that is knowledge that is not written down, not explicit knowledge. Tacit knowledge is that only the knowledge that you've got in your head, which you wouldn't bother writing down. But you can tell somebody in a normal conversation that you have with them. So it passes it on. So these sorts of ideas about setting up your offices in a particular way have become very important in knowledge-intensive areas. So it's not just about manufacturing processes. Good layout, bearing in mind the need for flexibility. Criteria may include higher utilization of space, equipment, and people, improved flow of information, materials, or people, improve employee morale and safer working conditions. Next week, we talk about that, of how to set up job satisfaction and whatever. Improve customer-client interaction, and we need to remain flexible. It will, regardless of how you've actually set something up, it will probably need to change. And that is a theme that goes through operations management. And I'm not apologizing for repeating it. You need to be flexible. Everything that you've made the decisions on right now may need to change. You need to keep that flexibility in mind. When we are talking about the layouts, we're talking about process or function layouts, product or line layouts, group or cellular layouts, different ways that you can set up your manufacturing, or in fact your teams of service orientation. Fixed position layouts when you have equipment which really can't be moved, or some sort of a hybrid layouts. These are various forms of facility layouts that you can use. When you're talking about service facility layouts, you have to consider the volume of demand, the range of services offered, the degree of personalization, and in fact the skills of the employee. Hospitals tend to group services by function. For example, you've got maternity, a section, you've got oncology, you've got a radiography. All of these are set up in various locations. So again, this key factors in office layout traditionally been proximity and privacy, but in knowledge-intensive organizations, it may include the ability to share that knowledge, such as water cooler technology. IKEA, think about this for, let me just put this in here. I may even take this, I may even get very casual and take this, this tie off later. You've all seen the tie. I'll take the tie off now. It's just banging against my, my microphone. How do they get customers to see all their products in IKEA? How do they do it? Ever tried to get out of IKEA quickly? You go in, and you go in there for the food. That's the way you got it. You can't get out unless you know the shortcuts. And at Festival City in Dubai, so, you know, they set the layout out so that if you come in, you can't get out again unless you go up and down and up and down and up and down. And that's well set up in this particular way. IKEA have actually done that. But now you have to think about how you might redesign your own workspace. This isn't accessible, but it's something for you to think about if you had the opportunity, bearing in mind you want to increase efficiencies within your organization, how would you change the layout of your own offices, of your own workspace? Just something that you need to think about. So supply chain management is a logical next step after forecasting demand and planning capacity. And then making a facility location decision and location layouts. It's the natural next step that we go through. So this key objective to SCM, or supply chain management, is to align an organization's functions with those of its suppliers upstream and with its customers and distributors downstream. You know that concept of upstream and downstream? Have you heard it before? Upstream is where you're getting your supplies from. Downstream is once it's gone through production, once you've done your bit, once you've transformed it, it goes out and being distributed on its way to the end users through wholesalers and retailers and whatever. So remember this upstream and downstream. So the definition of a supply chain as such, and think of it as a chain, they are collections of organizations that work together to provide raw materials that are converted into products and then are delivered to where customers can obtain them. So it's a chain, it's a series. The measures of success of having a good supply chain management system one measure is called cash-to-cash cycle. How long does it take you to get your money back once you've actually outlaid it at one particular point? In one study, companies with efficient SCM processes do this in a month, whereas those without SCM take 100 days or 3 months to actually get their money back. Another measure is total SCM cost, buying and handling inventory, order processing, information system support. So it ranges from 5% of sales to 12% of sales in one study. Now, when you have an organization that may only be making a 10% margin on their products, you are talking a significant influence on your profitability if your supply chain management is costing you anymore from 5 to 12% of those sales. It's a difference between being profitable and not being profitable, which is really what the bottom line is in this. It has some significant effects. The components in supply chain management, the management of the raw materials and the purchased componentry, the purchasing, the receiving, the storing, and the retrieval of those raw materials. Then there's the management of the materials during that transformation process. And we keep coming back to that transformation process. The work in process operations, how efficiently do you do that? And then there is the management of those finished goods. The packaging, the shipping, the distribution, or the logistics to the end users. All of these are the components within the supply chain management system. The starting point is the sourcing of raw materials or purchase parts. My client, and this was one of my clients who became a multi-millionaire Australian businessman, he once told me, who by the way had failed his accounting course in his undergraduate 3 times, unheard of for somebody to go through an undergraduate course and fail accounting, principles of accounting 3 times, became a multi-millionaire. So it says something about what you're actually learning within a university undergraduate environment. If he would still be able to almost a billionaire status, 850 million he ended up with. So he said to me, and it rung in my brain forevermore, selling well always starts with buying well. Selling well always starts with buying well. And it's one of those truisms that it's so obvious if you think about it, but you don't often get it in textbooks. That, it's your purchasing that starts off your selling process. If you've got the right people, if you've got the right products, if you bought well, then it's so much easier to sell it. But if you bought at an expanded price, or if you've got the wrong people that are doing the work, then it makes it very difficult to sell. The purchasing or procurement function is responsible for acquiring the materials or goods needed in the production phase. It is that interface between suppliers and the production function. General Motors, for example, spends more than double the amount on purchases than it does on wages. And it's probably going down the more and more they put robotics into their production systems. So an organization has 3 basic choices when you're sourcing a product. You can purchase the complete product from a contract manufacturer. You can purchase some components and materials and manufacture and assemble the balance in your own plant. Or you can manufacture the product completely, starting with the extraction of the basic raw materials. There are all sorts of options that you can get, and you need to choose what is best for your set of circumstances. There's a couple of examples which I'll very quickly go over because of the time constraint. Standard Oil is the one that you get within most textbooks. Standard Oil went everywhere from exploring for oil to drilling for oil, for taking the oil out and putting it into their own refineries, then from the refinery stage to putting it into their own fuel stations. So they did everything from getting it out of the ground or from exploring for it first, all the way to going into your car. So that's a vertical integration of a marketplace. Lord Vestey, on the other hand, my first job out of high school was I was in the Merchant Navy. I was a navigating officer. And I worked for a company called Blue Star Line, which I'm not even sure whether they're still around anymore. I haven't seen, they had a big blue star on the funnel anyway. But that was my job in the Merchant Marine, straight out of school. Lord Vestey was a great example of vertical integration. He started off as a butcher in London. And he decided that, yes, he was making a lot of money as a butcher, but he could do more, he could do better, if in fact he became a wholesaler as well. So he became a wholesaler of meat, and then decided that he would take as his wholesaler, he would supply his own shops, plus he would supply other shops with meat. So he was extending that vertical supply chain. Then what he did was to say, oh, wow, you know, I can be a wholesaler, but if I was an importer, I could actually extend that supply chain even more. So he could import meat into the country, which he would then give to his own wholesaling organization and other wholesaling organizations, which then from his whole wholesaling organization would go to his retail stores and to the general public. Then he had a thought. He said, well, you know, I'm importing this meat, but where is it importing from? Where is meat being grown or the cattle being reared? And he said, well, Australia has got a lot of land and they grow a lot of cattle, and Argentina has a lot of space, and that were the two major beef producers at this stage. So he went to Argentina and he went to Australia and he bought up vast tracts of land, and with this land he put his own cattle farms on these lands and bred his own cattle. So then he brought into he bought into the slaughterhouses. The slaughterhouses. So he was growing his own cattle. He had the slaughterhouses. He had his own freezers, which was part of storing the storing the meat. And in the UK, he had his importing, and he had his wholesaling, and he had his retailing. And the only thing that he didn't have was transport. And guess what that transport was called? You've forgotten what I said. Blue Star Line. And that's where I came into it. The last chain in that complete vertical integration was Blue Star Line. And that's where I came in. And I was working for Blue Star Line, which we were going from Australia, from South America. So the South American ones took it into Europe, Genoa, and various places, whereas from Australia it went more into Britain and the other side of the English Channel. So that's an example of the full integration, a full vertical integration, by doing it yourself. But sometimes this led to questions of ethical and possibly illegal behavior. And of course, illegal behavior is probably easier to define than ethical behavior. For example, Microsoft in the US, it was found that they were perfectly legal to only put out their Internet Explorer with Windows. Whereas in Europe, the courts determined that it was illegal for them to do that they also had to give people who bought Windows the opportunity to get other internet search engines. such as Firefox and what's the other ones? Mozilla Firefox and Google Chrome and whatever. So it had to give the opportunities to get all of those. So there are, I don't know whether you can describe this as unethical behavior. I thought it was just good marketing, but some people say that it was illegal. The Europeans said it was legal, the Americans said it wasn't. Yeah. Yes, wasn't illegal, but I would say that it was more ethical. Who talked to me just now about trams in Melbourne? Trams. You know what trams are? Yeah, in Melbourne is the only city that I know of, or Adelaide may have some, that the trams where you have buses that run along tracks, and they're run by electricity, overhead electricity. So it's a very efficient way. It used to be a very efficient way of inner city transportation in the U.S. Very few organizations, very few cities in the U.S. have got those trams now. Can anybody think of one city that still has the trams? San Francisco, yes. But that's more of a touristy thing than a pure a transportation system these days. But that's the only one that I can really think of in the US. General Motors decided that they wanted to sell their buses because they made money on buses, they weren't selling trams. But most of the cities in the US had actually set up their tramways. They'd already got the tracks and they'd already got their infrastructure. But General Motors came in and sold buses at a very, very much reduced rate so that the heads of the various cities said, well, it doesn't make much sense to keep our trams. These General Motor buses are much, much cheaper to run. And this is a very famous case in ethics. So what General Motors did is they eventually persuaded most of the city fathers of most American cities to get rid of the infrastructure for the trams. So once you've dug up the rails and you put the bitumen over the tops of the rails, you've got no tram network left anymore. So when that happened, they pushed the price of the buses up. Now, is that marketing or is that ethics? But to get into that, you see, I don't know. I'm not too sure. It's an ethics case, but this is not an ethics course, so we won't discuss it in detail. But it is an ethical issue. Should you be doing that? Should you be persuading somebody to get rid of their old way of doing something, and then as soon as they've got rid of the old way, you push the price of your product up? So, in a changing environment, any successful model is not guaranteed to be successful indefinitely. And look at the example of Hewlett-Packard on this particular one. They were, you know, the golden child of the IT industry at one stage. But have a look at the share prices right now. Their market share has gone down in a crazy way. Also, look at BlackBerry, I have to say. Look at what's happened to BlackBerry. Yes, they've sold 1 million of the Z10s since they've come out, but in the same period, you know, but iPhone 5 and Samsung S4 have sold 7 million. So, you know, the figures on its own indicate that there's something not quite right there. But 1 million is not bad, is it? There are advantages and there are disadvantages of having multiple suppliers sustaining supply chain management relationships. With its inherent integrated supply chains may lead to even better win-win situations. And what you are trying to do long-term is to create relationships. You know, supply chain management in its purest form is about creating long-term relationships. And for a long-term relationship to work properly, You've got to engage in win-win situations. You don't go out of your way to win and somebody else to lose, because ultimately that person who loses is not going to be wanting to be a partner over a long term. So always set out to get the best value for yourself, of course, but to make sure that it's still a win situation for the people that you're dealing with. So think of your situations as win-win. And sometimes we forget about that. We don't have the time to cover this, but Table 7.1 in your manual discusses the advantages and disadvantages of single versus multiple suppliers. And there's all sorts of advantages that you can get from having a single supplier, and there are advantages of getting multiple suppliers as well. It's about competitiveness and keeping people on the ball. But again, think win-win. How can we both win in those types of situations? Now, logistics deals with the flow of products into and out of the manufacturing process. Its functions includes receiving or uploading the inwards goods, verifying them, and preparing them for storage. It involves the packaging and shipping of those goods, the labeling, the correct loading of those goods. And then there's the warehousing, the physical maintenance of inventory. It can be more effective with technology assistance. All makes sense, does it not? Yeah, all like Coca-Cola. The reason for the SCT project, the whole reason behind it. If anybody's falling asleep right now, they should wake up just for the next 10 minutes. You have a case study within the exam. The case study you should all have by now. If you haven't, then jump up and down outside. This is too big a case study to be reading in the exam. The exam is 3.5 hours. It'll take you 3.5 hours to actually understand what this case study is about. There are lots and lots of things in there. I use this case study as a base, as a foundation for my project management courses, because it puts everybody back on the same basis. It's the reason that I was using a nuclear power station rather than everybody's individual companies. It puts everybody on the same level. We're all talking about the same one. We're not comparing apples with oranges. And this is why I use that particular case study in my project management courses. So read that particular course. The things that you will need to understand on that course, on that case study, is what's the business reason? Why a company such as Coca-Cola needed an automatic stock retrieval system. Why would you need one? Why would you need one? This is an operations function. It's not a project management case study for now, even though I use it as that. This is being used in an operations management function. But you still have to understand why somebody would choose an ASRS. No, not why somebody. Why Coca-Cola or SCT would want to choose an ASRS warehouse in that particular case. In Taiwan, that case. When we talk about a case study, it is about that case study. So you have to answer the questions based on the case study details. Yeah? Okay, now you can go back to sleep again. I'll talk about that next week, but it is, for me, it's very confusing because there's two types of exam here. Is Chifley and there's Atlanta. And you have a completely different exam, which I only found out about last week. I'll talk about both next week. Don't be too concerned about it. But it's, it's not designed to fail you. It's just a way of summarizing whether you've been awake for 4 weeks. So. Not for the case study. Not for the case study. Let me do this from memory, and I am doing this from memory. I think there are 4 or maybe 5. Oh, wait a second. 4 or 5. 4 or 5 questions out of 9 in section A. They're short answer questions. In part B, there are some 1 question out of 2. 1 question out of 2. I can tell you that 2 of the section A are ones that you are familiar with, or you should be familiar with. Vimto scanners. Understand how that gets done. And there's 2 others there, I think. Yes, I think there's 2 others. Correct. There's one that we haven't covered yet, and there's 1 other that you would need to do. So, but I'll do that next week. I will not leave you high and dry on your exam. It's in my best interest that you'll pass, not fail. So let me just go back to this particular one. This is the theory. This is where it actually comes. But let's, as efficient operations managers, think about, okay, not just about how we can receive package and warehouse, but how can we change processes? How can we do this even better than doing things really efficiently and effectively along there? There was an example of an organization called Signet that I worked for that supplied warehousing materials for goodness sake, to a global market, not to a global market, a national market in Australia. What they would do would be to receive the goods into their warehouse. They would store the goods, they would book them in, they would store the goods. They would repackage them in their own Signet identification. And then they would wait for the order to come from the customer. Then they would take those goods, they'd put them on the truck. So it's come in, all of the things that we've done there. Receiving the packaging and shipping and the warehousing. All of that. And I said, why? Why should they do that? What value was Signet actually adding in that transformation process? What were they actually adding? Remember what operations management is, an input, an output, and in the middle, there is an addition of something. And that's where we make them. What were they actually doing? Well, yes, but what were they actually doing to the goods that they were bringing in? How were they transforming them? They were branding. They were branding it. That's all they were doing. They were bringing it in, they were branding it, boom. And the branding was just by putting their own labels on it. That's all. So we said, why don't we think about this outside the box again? Why is there any need to bring this product into our warehouse at all? If we know where the product is going, why don't we just wait until